Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. I have recently had conversations with people that have questioned what I mean when I say that it is good for immigrants and other cultures to assimilate into American society. I guess that word is pretty politically charged. Okay, some have thought that I'm saying that they are not white enough or something like that. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm trying to get across is that we need to be more unified in our purposes. It's not good to have groups of people that are fighting against each other and undermining the goal of progressing as a culture and a society. We should be unified in seeing this great country become the best that it can be. But when we divide up into warring groups, this only hinders that goal. We can have our histories and our traditions and our celebrations and all of that, but being Americans should be a high priority. In the early 1990s, many refugees from the country of Somalia were welcomed into this nation to get away from their civil war. Many settled in the state of Minnesota and cities like Minneapolis. But they did not want to assimilate into our society, and many Muslims are now being exposed for what they have been doing. The Daily Wire says that President Donald Trump announced on Friday night that he will end temporary protected status, or TPS TPS program, for Somali immigrants in Minnesota who have been connected to a massive welfare fraud scheme. Quote, Minnesota under Governor Walz is a hub of fraudulent money laundering activity. This is what Trump posted on Truth Social. He said, I am, as President of the United States, hereby terminating effective immediately the temporary protected status for Somalis in Minnesota. Somali gangs are terrorizing the people that great state, and billions of dollars are missing, he said. Send them back to where they came from. It's over, unquote. Well, under Minnesota Democrat Governor Tim Walz, you remember him as Kamala's running mate, billions of taxpayer dollars have been stolen and reportedly funneled through fake nonprofit and shell companies. And alarmingly, some of that money has ended up in the hands of Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda-linked terror group Al-Shabaab. As one law enforcement source bluntly put it, and this is kind of telling, quote, the largest funder of Al-Shabaab is the Minnesota taxpayer. Much of the fraud has been traced to Minnesota's Somali community, where politically connected fraudsters have allegedly exploited numerous loopholes in the state's welfare system. In fact, let me bring you this from Ryan Thorpe and Christopher Rufo. Christopher Rufo has done some really good work here. They're writing for the Manhattan Institute, and they say Minnesota is drowning in fraud. Billions of taxpayer dollars have been stolen during the administration of Governor Tim Walz alone. Democratic state officials overseeing one of the most generous welfare regimes in the country are sleeping at the switch, and the media, duty-bound by progressive policies and pieties, refused to connect the dots. In many cases, the fraud has allegedly been perpetrated by members of Minnesota's sizable Somali community. Federal counterterrorism sources confirm that millions of dollars in stolen funds have been sent back to Somalia, where they ultimately landed in the hands of the terror group Al-Shabaab. As one confidential source put it, the largest funder of Al-Shabaab is the Minnesota taxpayer. Our investigation shows what happens when a tribal mindset meets a bleeding heart bureaucracy, when imported clan loyalties collide with political class too timid to offend, and when accusations of racism are cynically deployed to shield criminal behavior. The predictable result is graft, with taxpayers left to foot the bill. If you were to design, let's just think about this for a second. If I gave you an assignment, if you were to design a welfare program to facilitate fraud, it would probably look a lot like Minnesota's Medicaid Housing Stabilization Services Program, the the HSS program, the first of its kind in the country. And it was launched with a notable goal: to help seniors, addicts, and the disabled and the mentally ill secure housing. That was its goal. It was designed with low barriers to entry, and that's a big red flag right there, of course. It was designed with low barriers to entry and minimal requirements for reimbursement. Nonetheless, before the program went live in 2020, just 5 years ago, officials pegged it annual estimated price tag would be $2.6 million. Costs quickly spiraled out of control. I mean, who could see that coming, right? Shocker. In 2021, the program paid out more than $21 million in claims. Okay? So in 1 year, it went from, this is only going to be $2.6 million, which is still big, right? But $2.6 million, and a year later, they were paying out more than $21 million in claims. In the following year, annual costs shot up. They doubled, $42 million, then $74 million, then $104 million. During the first 6 months of this year, payouts totaled $61 million. So that's the first 6 months, okay? That means if the first 6 months or the second 6 months is the same as the first 6 months, then we're literally talking about $122 million. On August 1st, Minnesota's Department of Human Services moved to scrap the HSS program. I mean, it's just ballooning, and they are doing so, noting that payment to 77 housing stabilization providers, 77 of them, had been terminated this year due to credible allegations of fraud. Joe Thompson, then the acting U.S. attorney for the District of Minnesota, went even further, stating that, quote, the vast majority, unquote, of the HSS program is fraudulent. The vast majority. We're not talking about, we found some over here. The vast majority of it. On September 18th, Thompson announced criminal indictments for HSS fraud against 8 Muslims, 6 of whom, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office spokesperson, are members of Minnesota's Somali community. Quote, most of these cases, unlike a lot of Medicare fraud and Medicaid fraud cases nationally, aren't just overbilling. Thompson said in a press conference announcing these indictments that, quote, these are often just purely fictitious companies solely created to defraud the system. And that's unique in the extent to which We have that here in Minnesota. Thompson said many firms enrolled in the program, quote, operated out of storefronts, like dilapidated storefronts or rundown office buildings. The perpetrators often targeted people recently released from rehab, signing them up for Medicaid services they had no intention of providing. He noted many owners of companies engaged in HHS fraud had other companies through which they billed other Medicaid programs, such as the EIDBI autism program, the Adult Rehabilitative Mental Health Services Program, the Integrated Community Support Program, the Community Access for Disability Inclusion Program, PCA services, and other Medicaid waivered services. Quote, what we see are schemes stacked upon schemes. Let me repeat that again. What we see are schemes stacked upon schemes, draining resources meant for those in need. It feels never ending, Thompson said. I have spent my career as a fraud prosecutor, and the depth of the fraud in Minnesota takes my breath away. On September 18th, the same day that the HSS fraud charges were announced, the U.S. Attorney's Office reported that a man named Abdullah Nur Jassau had become the 56th defendant to plead guilty in the $250 million Feeding Our Future fraud scheme. Okay, here's another one of those schemes. Founded in 2016, Feeding Our Future was a small Minnesota nonprofit that sponsored daycares and after-school programs and to enroll in the federal child nutrition program. The organizations that Feeding Our Future sponsored were primarily owned and operated by members of Minnesota's Somali community, according to two former state officials with connections to law enforcement. And in 2019, Feeding Our Future received $3.4 million in federal funding distributed by the state. And in the months after COVID-19 pandemic began, however, the nonprofit rapidly increased its number of sponsored sites using fake meal counts, doctored attendance records, and fabricated invoices. The perpetrators of the fraud ring claimed to be serving thousands of meals a day, 7 days a week, to underprivileged children. In 2021, Feeding Our Future received nearly $200 million in funding. They went from 3.4 to $200 million. In reality, the money was being used to fund lavish lifestyles, purchase luxury vehicles, and buy real estate in the United States and in Turkey and in Kenya. In 2020, Minnesota officials raised concerns about the nonprofit's rapid expansion. And in response, the group filed a lawsuit alleging racial discrimination related to outstanding site applications, noting that Feeding Our Future, caters to foreign nationals. So obviously, this is just a result of racism, right? That's the standard operating playbook for that cohort. When in doubt, claim racism, claim bias. Even David Gaither, a former Minnesota state senator and nonprofit leader, said that. He says, even if the facts don't point to that, it allows for many folks in the middle or on the center left to just simply stay silent. Gaither, he believes the mainstream media alongside Minnesota's Democratic establishment have long turned a blind eye to fraud within the Somali community. This, in turn, allowed the problem to metastasize. Quote, the media does not want to put a light on this, Gaither said. And if you're a politician, it's a significant disadvantage for you to alienate the Somali community. If you don't win the Somali community, you can't win Minneapolis. And if you don't win Minneapolis, you can't win the state. End of story, unquote. The fraudulers have leveraged their growing political influence to cultivate close ties with Minnesota's elected officials. Several individuals involved in the Feeding Our Future scheme donated to or appeared publicly with Ilhan Omar, the Somalian-born congresswoman from Minneapolis, the one that married her brother and all that. Omar's deputy district director, Ali Isse, advocated on behalf of Feeding Our Future. Omar Fahet, a former state senator who recently ran for Minneapolis mayor, lobbied Governor Tim Walz in support of the program, and one of the accused, the Abdi Nur Salah, served as a senior aide to Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. Just days later, on September 24th, U.S. Attorney Joseph Thompson announced his office's first indictment in yet another fraud case. This time, the scheme involved federally funded autism services for children. Yeah, get this. The accused is a woman named Asha Farah Hassan, a member of Minneapolis's Somali community, who has also been charged in the Feeding Our Future scam. So she's involved in both. She's alleged to have played a role in a $14 million fraud scheme perpetuated against Minnesota's early intensive development and behavioral intervention program. Hassan and her co-conspirators approached parents in the Somali community, for the most part, and recruited their children into autism therapy services. It didn't matter, the prosecutors suggest, if a child did not have autism diagnosis, Hassan would come up with a fraudulent one for him. In a press release announcing the indictment, the U.S. Attorney's Office made clear that the alleged autism fraud scheme extended to a wide network of people. To drive up enrollment, Hassan and her partners paid monthly cash kickback payments to the parents of children who enrolled in this program, the release reads. Now, this is just amazing. Get this. These kickback payments range from approximately $300 to $1,500 a month per child. The amount of these payments were contingent on the services DHS authorized to each child to receive, and the higher the authorization amount, the higher the kickback. Often, because, money talks, right? Often parents threatened to leave and take their child to other autism centers if they did not get paid a higher kickback. Why would they do that? Because there's a bunch of fraudulent centers. Much like with the HSS program, autism claims to Medicaid in Minnesota have skyrocketed in recent years. And here we go. From $3 million in, just 6 years ago. So 2018, $3 million to $54 million the next year, 2019, to $77 million in 2020, to $183 million in 2021, to $279 million in 2022, and $399 million in 2023. Meantime, the number of autism providers in the state spiked, of course, because everybody sees the money. These autism providers spiked from 41 to 328 over the same period of time. We're talking about 5 years there. and it skyrocketed from 41 providers to 328. With many of these Somali community, the Somali community establishing their own autism treatment centers, citing the need for culturally appropriate programming. And by the time the fraud scheme was exposed, this is just mind-blowing. 1 in 16 Somali 4-year-olds in the state had reportedly been diagnosed with autism. That's a rate more than triple the state average. Quote, "This is not an isolated scheme," Thompson said. That's the U.S. attorney. And he said in a press release that from feeding our future to housing stabilization services and now autism services, these massive fraud schemes form a web that has billions of dollars in taxpayer money. Each case we bring exposes another strand of this network. What Thompson arguably hinted at, but left unsaid, should be obvious. This network of fraud schemes, which form a web that has stolen billions of dollars in taxpayer money, involve many members of the Minnesota Somali community. And the Feeding Our Future, HSS, and autism service cases are far from the only examples. At least 28, I'm going to say this again, at least 28 scandals have surfaced since Walz was elected governor in 2019. 28. Most of the large-scale fraud rings, according to former FBI officials who spoke to City Journal, have been perpetrated by members of the Somali community. Kayesh Megan, a Somali American who had worked as a fraud investigator at the Minnesota Attorney General's office and declined an interview request, identified the problem last year when they said, quote, "We must grapple with something that is uncomfortable and true. Nearly all of the defendants in the cases that I've listed are from my community, the Somali community," unquote. Perhaps the most surprising aspect of the Somali fraud story is just simply the scale, with total costs running into the billions of taxpayer dollars. That raises the question, what happened to all that money? I mean, really, what happened to all of that billions of dollars of taxpayer money from Minnesota? The Somali fraud rings have sent huge sums in remittance or money transfers from Minnesota to Somalia, according to the reports. An estimated 40% of households in Somalia get remittance from abroad. 40%. In 2023 alone, the Somali, it's a diaspora. They're like money changing type businesses. The Somali diaspora sent back $1.7 billion. More that's more than the Somali government's budget for that year. I don't know if we can wrap our brains around this. Okay, that the diaspora, the money that was sent to Somalia, is more than the government of Somali's budget. Our investigation reveals, they say here, that for the first time, that some of the money has been directed to an even more troubling destination: the Al-Qaeda-linked Islamic terror group Al-Shabaab. According to multiple law enforcement sources, Minnesota's Somali community has sent untold millions through a network of hawalas, that they're informal clan-based money traders, as I was talking about, that have wound up in the coffers of Al-Shabaab. According to Glenn Kearns, he's a retired Seattle Police Department detective who spent 14 years on a federal joint terrorism task force. The Somalis ran a sophisticated money network spanning from Seattle to Minneapolis, and were routing significant amounts of cash on commercial flights from Seattle Airport to the Hawala network in Somalia. One of these networks, Kearns discovered, sent $20 million abroad in a single year. The amount of money was staggering, Kearns said. Kearns' investigation eventually expanded to Minnesota, where he realized the same thing was happening. He said, quote, "I worked on it for 5 years," Kearns said. We had sources going into the Hawalas to send money, and I went down to Minnesota and pulled all of their records. And, well, shoot, all these Somalis sending out money are on DHS benefits. How does that make any sense? We had good sources telling us, well, this is welfare fraud. Kearns then investigated the Hawalas in Somalia that were receiving the money transfers, and he determined primarily through human sources that significant funds were being sent from America to al-Shabaab networks in Somalia. Whether the money was intended for al-Shabaab or not, Kearns said they were at least taking a cut. A second former official who worked on the Minneapolis team as well confirmed the story's general structure by saying that this former official who requested to remain anonymous but worked on the two terrorism cases that intersected with the Minnesota's Somali community and has studied the flow of funds from Minnesota to Somalia, said, quote, "Every scrap of economic activity in the Twin Cities, in America, throughout Western Europe, and anywhere Somalis are concentrated, every cent that is sent back to Somalia benefits al-Shabaab in some way. For every dollar that is transferred from the Twin Cities back to Somalia, al-Shabaab is taking a cut of it." And even a third source spoke on conditions of anonymity, described the close link between the Somali American community in Minnesota and Islamic terror groups abroad. 10 years ago, the source was recruited as an independent contractor for a 3-letter agency in investigation into the Minnesota men, the ones who had joined or at least attempted to join ISIS. That year, a Homeland Security Task Force report found that Minnesota led the nation in the number of Americans who had joined or attempted to join ISIS. Of the 58 Americans who had done so, nearly half came from Minnesota. Scott Johnson, who has covered these and related stories for years, attended several of these men's trials, reporting on them for City Journal. And he noted that the Minnesota men gave the outward appearance of American assimilation, as he put it, including being sophisticated users of social welfare benefits. The relationship is ongoing. This is a third-rail conversation, but the largest funder of al-Shabaab is the Minnesota taxpayer. That's what the third source said. And they said this is an issue here that is real. And if there is ever an event that is traceable back to these funds or to the people from which, this area, then the situation will take on a whole new set of optics, they said. Welfare fraud is likely to become a major issue in Minnesota 2026 elections. Governor Tim Walz, now seeking a third term, has presided over a litany of scandals and faces Republican Kristen Robbins, who has made the fraud prevention central to her campaign. Gaither, the former state senator that we talked about, said political blowback is brewing in the state, and that as more information emerges from ongoing investigations, it's real tough. It's a real rough place to be if you're the current administration. He added that if you talk to law enforcement officials and others close to the probes, quote, they will tell you off the record that we aren't even close to being halfway there in understanding the true scale of the fraud. The first step to solving a problem is acknowledging it. And by extension, that means recognizing the problem's true source. So far, Minnesota's governing class and its media establishment have failed to take the basic step. Minnesotans will have to confront the uncomfortable but unavoidable reality. Members of the Somali community have played a central role in a massive fraud, just massive fraud, now engulfing the North Star State. It's just absolutely incredible, the amount of fraud that is being uncovered now. And meanwhile, the media and the Democratic establishment have just simply largely ignored the issue, leaving ordinary Minnesotans to fit the bill, and while their money funds international terrorism. This is what I'm talking about. This is the undermining of what what we have here in our culture, in our society, in the American way. This is not becoming an American. If you want to do this kind of stuff, you go do it outside the country. You don't have to be an American. You don't have to be welcomed by this country. God has blessed this country, extremely, with extremely large amounts of blessing here. Our country has been able to do more for the kingdom of God and how his word is spread throughout the world than any other society or country in history. And yet these Somalis here that are part of this fraud are undermining that. And they're not trying to become Americans. And you can be Muslim and you can be American. It doesn't matter. Just like I can be a Christian and I can be American. But when you're undermining this, when you're not unified with us to try to promote our society forward, then you're working against it. I would love to hear what you have to say on it. You can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. Thank you very much for listening. This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.